fitness enthusiasts and ultimate Frisbee aficionados to the TOBU Fitness Podcast. Your guide to elevating your game and mastering the art of ultimate Frisbee through the lens of strength and conditioning. Whether you're a seasoned player or just stepping onto the field for the first time, this podcast is your one-stop destination for unlocking your true potential. This is the TOBU Fitness Podcast with your host, certified strength and conditioning coach, Justin Shelby.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the podcast. This is episode number 3. We've got a really fun episode for you today. This is going to be the top 5 exercises for ultimate Frisbee, in my opinion. Hope you like the intro as well. Hope you didn't skip over the intro. Make sure you listen to that. I'm really proud of that. Hope you like it. Right? I think it's pretty cool. Good way to start off the show. But yeah, also, as far as things that are just going on, we've got sectionals this weekend. I'm recording this on a Thursday, sectionals Saturday and Sunday. If you're competing in sectionals or if you're listening to this after you competed sectionals, good luck or hope everything went well for you. But yeah, sectionals is this weekend. I play for a team, an open men's team called Alamode out of San Antonio, Texas. So we're going to be competing at the Texas sectional this weekend. It's in San Antonio as well, which is pretty cool. I don't live in San Antonio. I live in Austin, but I'm going to be commuting down for that. But yeah, pretty excited for that. For today's episode, I've got to start off by saying, admittedly, I told myself and I told people, I think I said it on a Q&A once, that I would not make a video or a YouTube video, Instagram video, whatever about this topic. And here I am going against my word. But I think for a podcast, this is okay because this is a bigger format where I can explain a lot more of the context to a lot of these exercises. But I got to make it clear that you got to understand that not every single person is going to benefit from each exercise the same. If I'm trying to speak to as many ultimate players as possible, which I'm doing, you got to be as general as possible. So for some of these exercises, they might work really well for you, but they might not work well for your teammate. On the flip side, if your teammate had really, really good success and results from one exercise, might not work as well for you. So these 5 are exercises that I think, generally speaking, are going to be really good for ultimate players, but just know this isn't the holy grail. This isn't the end all be all, the perfect solution. Make sure you're exercising a little bit of common sense, a little bit of critical thinking, and seeing how it applies for you. As always, if you want to use some of these exercises, start with a little bit, see how your body feels, and then slowly progress up from there. That's always going to be the best thing. Just kind of trial and error, test it out, see how it feels. So yeah, let's get started here. I want to start with 2 honorable mentions I have, and then I'll go into my top 5. Number 1, the first honorable mention are extensive pogo hops. I'm clumping pogo hop, or I'm calling it pogo hops because that's the first one, but I'm really clumping a bunch of different little hopping exercises into this category here. But essentially, if you're not familiar, pogo hops are where you're jumping, but you're pretty much just trying to jump from your ankles. So you're not getting a huge bend in your hips and your knees. Think about like if you're doing jump rope, you're not bending into your hips and knees a lot. It's really just your ankles kind of bending. So with that, you're not getting super, super high off the ground. You're just doing kind of a little bit bitty hop. You can get pretty high with that, but obviously there's a max limit that you're going to get to that probably isn't going to be the same as your max vertical jump. And what the extensive there means is we're doing it for duration rather than height or force or distance with that. Meaning we're just trying to accumulate a lot of volume with these. That's why with jump rope, you're never going to see somebody go up for their max height jump rope, right? You never see that. You see people jump rope for 30 seconds, for a minute, for 5 minutes, where they're doing it for a long time. That's the same kind of idea with these pogo hops, is we're just trying to build up a little bit of volume. The best way you can think about it is like when you're first starting at the gym, you don't start with very, very heavy weights. You don't go into the gym, immediately try to squat 300 pounds, 400 pounds, whatever it is. You go in there and you start off with your body weight, or you start off with lightweight and you do a lot of reps. Whereas with plyometrics, we really don't see that same concept. You see people try to go into the gym, they go out into the field and they immediately try to start doing all the very, very intense stuff. A lot of the stuff that you're going to see on social media that people are showing off, because that stuff is really cool to look at. Those are the fun exercises. But just like we know, if you go into the gym, you immediately try to squat 300, 400 pounds, you would get injured, right? That just wouldn't work out well. And we've got to do the same thing with the plyometrics. We've got to kind of build up a good base. Now, I think with plyometrics, it's a little bit different where we can also do a little bit of that intense stuff, right? There's a lot of players who haven't done any sort of formal plyometrics training, but they can go and jump as high as they can. They can go and sprint and do change of direction. So it's not black or white. You need to start with extensive plyometrics and then slowly build up, like it is with weightlifting. With weightlifting, you've probably got to start with lightweight and then slowly build up. But with plyometrics, we have some sort of wiggle room. But I think it is good that most people are adding in some sort of extensive plyometrics just to build up that base. So we're doing it for longer duration so then we can build capacity in the muscles, the tendons, and the joints. When we're doing any sort of jumping, that's a different type of force on the body. When we're doing weight training, that's one type of force where there is an external load on the body, a weight, a dumbbell, whatever it is, and that is providing some sort of force. But when we are doing a jump, that is a completely different type of force, and we've got to make sure that our muscles, tendons, our joints, our ligaments are all able to handle that, and we can slowly kind of build up with that. So if we're doing pogo hops, that gets our ankles, our Achilles, our calf, our foot muscles also really, really adapted to that. One thing that I highly recommend is doing those barefoot as long as your body can handle that. Now, of course, if you've never done any sort of jumping, I wouldn't immediately jump into doing it barefoot and doing it for like 30 seconds to a minute on end, right? That's probably not a good idea. But if you've been doing jumping training for a little bit, plyometric training for a little bit, and then you start doing a little bit barefoot as well, I think that's something that's good because it gets your foot moving a little bit more. Your foot isn't just compressed into the shoe into your cleats the entire time so that all your foot muscles and your foot joints can't move, right? If we can get barefoot, then we can get those to move a little bit more, and then we can start to kind of train those muscles just a bit as well. With extensive pogo hops as well, and this is where I said I was clumping everything in together, is we don't just have to do the jump rope style 2-foot straight up and down. We can also challenge the angles and the joints and the forces a little bit more by going in different directions. So you can think about like a line hop where we're going forward and backwards with 2 feet, or we're going side to side. The forces there are a little bit different. It's not just straight up and down. You're also getting a little bit of forward deceleration, backwards deceleration, side to side. So we're kind of getting the sides of the ankles trained up a little bit more. And again, with that different type of force, with that spring force that or we can get our muscles, tendons, and our joints kind of accustomed to. I also like introducing single leg extensive pogo hops here. So you can literally do that same jump rope style, but now imagine you're only doing it with 1 foot, or you can do that line hop style where you're going forward or backwards, side to side on single leg. That's something that's going to be pretty hard for most people, even if you're a very advanced athlete. Doing that on single leg, that'll get most of the muscles down there burning pretty quickly. So I think that's a way that we can start to develop that as well. When we're doing like cuts, think about really fast cuts, really fast change of directions. We're getting our ankles and our joints into these weird positions, right? Our ankles are bending quite a bit. Our foot is having to bend quite a bit. So if we can kind of train that in a very easy and controllable and progressed way with like a single leg side-to-side line hop or something like that, then I think that's also great as well. I think that doesn't have to be kind of the meat and potatoes of a workout. What I often do is I'll add in a set or two of extensive plyometrics to the very beginning of the workout so it can kind of act as like an extension of the warm-up. And then you can start by doing some springy stuff when you're fresh, just to kind of, wake everything up, really train that area quite a bit, and then I think it kind of flows nicely into the rest of your workout. Now, the reason I don't have this in the top 5 is because I think most players are able to get a lot of like their quote unquote capacity, so they can build up the capacity in the muscles, the tendons, and the joints just by playing a decent amount of ultimate, right? When you're running, when you're cutting, you're playing defense, all that stuff. Most of the time, you're doing that at a low to medium intensity. It's very rare that you're actually going at 100% and doing a true full like change of direction at 100%, or you're doing a full max effort vertical jump. This isn't me saying that like players are lazy or anything like that. It's just the nature of the game. It's very rare that you are doing a true max effort, change of direction, vertical jump, sprint, whatever it is. Most of it lives in that low to medium intensity. So most players are getting a lot of reps of that already. So I don't think, a lot of times it's something that we have to add a ton more in. I don't think it then falls into that top 5 for that reason. The second exercise I would add into the honorable mention category is jumping. So again, kind of similar. The reason I didn't add this into the top 5 is I think it's too similar to the pogo hops, and I think it's a little bit of a cop out just to say jumping. But jumping here meaning true max effort jumps. So either double leg or single leg. Now, I've heard some people say in the past, and I've kind of thought about this, and I agree with this as well, is sprinting is probably more important than jumping. So being fast is probably more important than having a high vertical jump. But like I talked about in episode 2, not everything's black and white. We don't always have to say one is better than the other. A lot of times it's apples to oranges. We can always improve both. We don't have to pick one or the other. And I think with jumping in particular, if we're still training jumping, a lot of the qualities that we gain by training jumping often carry over to sprinting, often carry over to change of direction. For example, if you're doing a 2-legged jump, so whether you're just standing stationary and you're going into like a half squat or a quarter squat position and then coming up, or if you're going to a full squat position like a regular squat jump, or if you're doing a running penultimate jump where you're running in to a 2-legged jump, a lot of times with those, you're bending into a pretty deep hip and knee bend, and then you're having to explode out of that. So you're having to explode out of a deep knee and hip bend position. What does that sound like to you? That sounds like cutting to me, because a lot of times when we cut, we have to get into a deep hip and knee bend position and then explode out. A lot of times that sounds like acceleration, because our first couple steps of an acceleration, we're in a pretty low position where our hips are bent and our knees are bent. So not saying go jump and that's going to improve your acceleration directly. It's not one for one, but we're training a lot of the same qualities. If we're trying to get more explosive overall, that's a big buzzword that a lot of people use, explosiveness, improving explosiveness. Well, this is just one way that we can do it. If we can practice vertical jumping, that can oftentimes improve the qualities of explosiveness that can then carry over to a lot of things overall. Similar to single leg jumping, it's very similar to just top end sprinting, whereas that 2-legged jump might be a little bit more similar to acceleration. So those first couple steps, when we're kind of at top speed, it's very similar to a single leg jump. When we do a single leg jump, our muscles have to contract very, very quickly, work together to stiffen up the ankle joint so then it can propel us up. There has to be that momentary kind of co-contraction, they call it, where all the muscles around the joint co-contract. They contract at the same time to create a little bit of stiffness so then we can actually jump up in the air. If everything gets super, super soft and we don't have that good co-contraction, well, then a lot of times it's going to be hard to translate that horizontal momentum into vertical. So if we can practice that and we can get really, really good at that, that's very similar to sprinting, where each time our foot hits the ground when we're at top end speed, right, our ankle and our foot and everything has to kind of stiffen up. So then when we hit the ground, we don't just absolutely collapse, right? And we are actually able to put force into the ground. If we can train single leg jumping, get good at that, that's something that can also help out the stiffness qualities of that can also then carry over to sprinting as well. So yeah, it's not one for one jumping is going to improve your sprinting. It's just training those overall kind of athletic qualities. Another example is body awareness. When you're jumping and you're having to reach up for something, specifically a disc, right? If you're just jumping up and trying to use like a sky trainer, for example, where that disc is fixed, you're maybe not having to do as much of that body awareness or you're not having to challenge your body awareness as much because you know exactly where that disc is. But let's say you're jumping up for a disc that your teammate has thrown. That disc is moving in the air a little bit. And if you have to kind of move your body around a defender as well, that's a lot of body awareness. That's a lot of just knowing how to manipulate your body while you're in the air. Body awareness is something that's very important in agility. For example, when you're reacting to, let's say you're guarding somebody and they're changing directions a lot, they're moving a lot, and you're having to react and have to shift and just kind of stay with them, you've got to have a good level of body awareness. Also, when you're landing from a jump, go up for a max effort jump. Let's say you jump 30 inches. Well, now that's a 30-inch fall back down to the ground that your body has to decelerate from, catch yourself, absorb that force, right? So your muscles are also strengthening on that landing as well. We're just training those overall qualities. Your body has to absorb that force, kind of catch yourself when you land, similar to when you decelerate when you change direction. So that's why I think jumping is also a very, very valuable exercise. No matter how you see it, if you think sprinting is more important, if you think jumping is more important, I think what's most important is training the overall athletic qualities. Let's take a quick break from the show to talk about the sponsor of today's episode. Once again, it's Breakmark Ultimate. They're an apparel company that makes awesome jerseys. Make sure you check them out. I want to talk about the deal that they're extending through the fall. So if you're a college team or if you're a high school team that needs some jerseys, this might be really great for you. They've got a bundle deal for jerseys. So you get a white, a dark, a reversible, a pair of shorts, and hat, all in this bundle here. We're starting at $85. Your white, your dark, and your pair of shorts comes with a free reversible and a free hat. They've got a couple different design and pricing options, but I think this is an absolute steal. It's a great deal. Make sure you check it out if your team is in need of jerseys. Let's get back to the show. So now let's get into the actual top 5. I put them in order here, but I think they're very interchangeable, so I'm not too strict, not too glued to this order. But yeah, starting off with number 5 is the med ball chop. Now, what a chop is, a med ball chop, you're obviously doing it with a med ball, but this can also be done with a cable. This can be done with a dumbbell or just holding onto like a weight plate, but you're in a kneeling position. So one knee down and one foot is forward, and then you're going to be holding onto your weight, and then you're going to be doing like a chop. So imagine you're coming from one side of your body. So let's say I'm starting with the weight up towards my left shoulder, all the way up, and then I'm bringing it all the way down towards my right pocket. And then I'm going back and forth like that. So my torso is having to rotate. By being in that kneeling position, I've really stabilized my lower body. I've kind of locked my lower body in. So I'm not getting a lot of rotation from my lower body, which is then forcing my upper body and my spine in particular to be the thing that is rotating the most. Now, what's really great about that is I'm getting mobility through the spine. When we throw, when we sprint, when we do a lot of athletic movements, throwing is the most obvious one that we can see. We need a ton of rotation. And what can happen a lot of times is when we're doing a lot of lifts, a lot of like deadlifts, squats, these very symmetrical movements, we can end up becoming very, very stiff in our spine. Bench press, overhead presses as well. We end up becoming very, very stiff in our spine because that is what's advantageous for the lift. The more you can kind of compress and very stiffen up, then the more force that you can put into the ground to do these lifts. That's not saying that these lifts are bad. I think they're very, very valuable because we need the strength that we get from them in order to produce force. We just also want to make sure that we're doing stuff like these med ball chops that can then kind of offset that a little bit, so then we can keep those negative benefits of those away. So these med ball chops, they help us keep that mobility through the spine. We're also training our core through rotation. If you're using some sort of weight, then your core is the thing that's having to actually rotate you side to side. So we're getting some good training with that as well. And then because we're using the weight, we're also loading up the muscles as we rotate. So when we're doing just regular stretches, when we're doing just regular mobility exercises, a lot of times we're just kind of helping the muscles relax so that we can get into these deeper positions. Like if I bend down to touch my toes, if I hold that position long enough, all I'm doing is my brain is just telling my hamstrings and my muscles, hey, it's safe. Hey, it's okay to be in this long kind of stretched out position. We can relax a little bit more. And that's what helps me get farther and farther into the stretch. It's oftentimes just kind of dampening the protective mechanisms of the muscles. The muscles have these protective mechanisms and we're kind of turning those off a little bit so we can get better flexibility. Now, if I've got weight involved with this, well, I'm getting that mobility by rotating into the spine, but because I have weight, I'm also getting that strength at the same time. So I'm not just dampening the protective mechanisms and then calling it at that and kind of leaving myself more vulnerable because I don't have the strength in these more mobile positions. Because I have the weight, I'm developing that strength and that mobility kind of at the same time. With this one, you can always kind of progress this more into a throw, whereas the regular med ball chop, you might just be moving that weight kind of slowly or at a moderate speed through a full range of motion. I can start to progress this one to now I'm actually very, very explosively throwing that med ball into a wall or something as I rotate. So I'm getting very good core explosive power while I'm also training that mobility. Number 2, or I guess this is actually number 4, sorry, is the isometric long lunge. If you follow me on Instagram, I talk about this one a lot. I think it's a very, very valuable exercise for many reasons. What the isometric long lunge is you are in the bottom of a lunge position. So imagine you're down in that kneeling position again. So one knee is down, one foot is forward. And then from there, you bring your back knee up about an inch off the ground and you just hold and hover there. Or if you're doing a walking lunge, you would come down until your knee is just barely above the ground and you are holding that position. One of the best reasons I like this is it's just pure muscular endurance through the lower body. We're getting a ton of the quad working. We're getting that back hip working as well. A lot of people, when I first start working with them, I have them do this exercise. They can't even hold it for like 15 to 20 seconds. And that just tells us how little muscular endurance we often have. Whereas if you start doing this more, you start building it up, then we can start building up the endurance of those lower body muscles, which is something that we need throughout any sport, right? When we're running and jumping and cutting a lot, we want to make sure that we have that muscular endurance. Now, what the isometric component of that long lunge means, what isometric means is the muscle length isn't changing. So you can think about with a regular exercise, think about a bicep curl where I'm curling my elbow with a dumbbell in my hand. As I curl up, as I bring my hand up, my bicep is shortening because it's contracting. And as I bring my hand down and my elbow extends, then my bicep is lengthening. With an isometric, we're not getting any of that. So we're not getting the muscle shortening or lengthening at all. The muscle is just having to tense up. It's creating tension, but it's just holding in that position. So the joint angles aren't changing at all. We're not going up or down, anything like that. Now, what's great about that is because the muscle isn't shortening or lengthening, there's oftentimes not going to be that like muscle tearing that kind of happens. When you're doing like a regular exercise, because the muscle is lengthening, we're also getting a little bit of like tearing, like micro tearing, you want to call it, just to keep it very, very simple. We're getting a little bit of like micro tearing, and that's what often causes the soreness. Now, that micro tearing then heals, it recovers, and then it comes back stronger than it was before. But because with this isometric, we're not getting that, right? We have very, very low soreness. So we're still creating force, right? We're still getting tension through the muscle. We're just not having that soreness associated with it. So I think an isometric is great on a recovery day where I can still build strength, I can still build endurance, but I don't have to worry about then not being recovered for the next day. If you're doing a high-low training split, for example, where you have one day that's a very intense day, the next day is a low intensity day, next day is a high intensity, and you're alternating like that, then I think isometrics are great on those low intensity days. So you can still get work, but you're not worried about getting super, super sore. Also, I think they're really, really great for developing mobility. Kind of along that same point as earlier, is if I can get into these really, really low positions, like in an isometric long lunge where I can get a deep bend in my hip and then that back leg is extended, so I'm getting a nice stretch of my hip flexor, I'm getting kind of that opposite action of the legs. One is forward in flexion, one is back and is extended, right? When we're sprinting, when we're running, that's kind of what we get. We get that alternating action where one leg's coming forward, one leg's going back. Now, if I can hold that position and I can have tension and strength in that position at the same time, that's going to help mobility carry over a lot more, in my opinion. It's not just going to be our brain telling our muscles to relax, right? It's going to be us developing that strength in that deeper position, which I think is really, really crucial. What's also great about the isometric long lunge is it's really great for tendon health, specifically with the knee. That's something that a lot of ultimate players have to deal with, is knee pain. Now, what happens with the isometric long lunge is because those muscles are holding the entire time, specifically the quad, because the quad is contracting the entire time, it's also pulling on that patellar tendon, which is the knee tendon that a lot of players feel when they feel knee pain. Because that quad is contracting, it's also pulling on that tendon. And after holding, if you're holding an isometric long lunge for, let's say, 30 seconds, a minute, over time, the muscle is contracting and pulling on that tendon more and more and more and more and more. And eventually we get a little bitty stretch of that tendon, which can be very good for it, right? And then as soon as you come back out of the exercise, the muscle goes back to how it was, so the tendon goes back to how it was as well. But I think that little bitty stretch of the tendon in a very controlled setting like this is something that can also be very beneficial for it, just to help it kind of relax a little bit more, just overall tendon health. Also, the isometric lung lunge, I think, is great for balance reasons. Sometimes if you put somebody in an isometric long lunge and they have a very narrow stance where their feet aren't super wide, not wide as in like how far forward and backwards they are, but side to side. If you get them in a very narrow stance side to side, a lot of times they end up starting to fall over, and that's not a great sign. If you don't have good balance with both feet on the ground, right, that's not a great sign. So I think doing something like this and improving the balance there is something that's really good. Lastly is mental fortitude with this. This is something that I talk to some of my clients about, but just the act of holding one of these isometric long lunges, over time it's going to burn. But you know that you can go longer, right? Like if I'm doing a 60-second hold, for example, by about the 30-second mark, it's burning. But I know I can do another 30 seconds. I know I can just hold that position because I don't have a weight that I have to stand back up with. I know my body doesn't have to stand back up. I know I just have to hold this position. So it's burning like crazy, but I know I can go longer. And with that, if you can stay calm, if you can just find a point on the wall and you can just focus on it the entire time and you can stay composed and you're not kind of hitting that internal panic button as soon as it starts to burn, I think that's something that's really, really good. In Ultimate, for example, you could be playing defense. Let's say you get the turn and you go and cut a bunch of times and then finally you get the disc. When you get the disc, you are probably super, super tired. You're out of breath, your legs are burning, everything. But you've got to stay composed with the disc because if you turn it over, you're back to playing defense or you're about to get scored on. So making sure that we have the composure in those situations is super important. Not saying, again, that improving your isometric long lunge is suddenly going to make you a better thrower when you're tired, but it's just that overall quality of mental fortitude. I think this is just one extra bonus of this exercise. That's another reason I really like it. Number 3 are sprints. Now, this one might seem like a cop-out, but I want you to hear me out on this one. I think a lot of people think about sprints strictly as a way to improve speed, which it is, right? If you want to get faster, if you want to get better at sprinting, then you've probably got to sprint. But sprinting is one of the fastest things we can do, if not the fastest thing that we can do. And we've got to make sure that our muscles, our tendons, our joints and stuff are really good at being strong and moving through these fast positions. So I think what's great about sprinting, if we just think about it strictly as an exercise, is it's a great way to strengthen up at super, super fast speeds. For example, if you go out and sprint and then you feel your hamstrings are sore the next day, right? That's one of the best hamstring exercises. That's a great way to strengthen up your hamstring very, very quickly. I think there are a lot of exercises that try to replicate getting like your hamstrings and your legs to contract super, super quickly, but I think there's no way to do it better than just going out and sprinting, right? It's the best way that we can get very, very fast hamstring contractions. And that goes for the rest of your body, right? Your hips are moving through their motions, they're flexing and extending super, super quick, right? And they're having to produce speed, or they're having to produce force at very, very fast speeds. So it's not that there's sprinting. There's not sprinting for speed and then sprinting for building fast muscle contractions, right? There's not two different types of sprinting in that regard. They're the same thing, right? If you go out and sprint, you're training your speed, right? You're training getting faster, but you're also getting a lot of these other great qualities. You're training your muscles and your tendons at a very, very fast speed that a lot of times that we don't get with just traditional weight training, right? I can do a bunch of deadlifts and I can do a bunch of hamstring curls and stuff, but those are naturally a little bit slower, right? Because I'm having to resist gravity, or I'm having to resist a band or some sort of like external resistance, like a dumbbell or a weight, right? Naturally, those contractions are going to be a little bit slower than if I'm going out and sprinting, which is one of the fastest things we can do. Also, for example, me personally, I know when I do sprint starts where I start in a kneeling position. So again, one knee down, 1 foot forward, and then I start sprinting from there. The next day, my adductor muscles, your groin muscles, are insanely sore, right? So that's, again, it's like that's one of the best ways that we can kind of train a lot of those leg muscles through a very, very fast speed and get it a type of training that you don't traditionally get in the gym. Now, another reason I think sprints are really good as an exercise, why I would put it in my top 5, is sprinting is a very nervous system heavy movement, meaning that our brain has to sync together, our muscles has to just continually send signals to our muscles to fire, 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 fire. And that can go away very, very quickly, right? The gains that we can kind of make with that, like our nervous system and our brain's ability to send those signals to our muscles to get them to contract very, very quick, that often goes away very, very quickly. So we've got to make sure that we're constantly kind of touching up on that. So that's why we should be sprinting semi-frequently, I think 1 to 2 times a week. And then of course, if you're playing and doing drills and stuff like that, you're also getting that sprint frequency. But if we go a very, very long time without doing any sort of sprinting in any sort of context, then we can start to kind of lose some of those like nervous system gains. So I think it's good to kind of touch up on sprinting and not just take these very, very extended long periods of time away from sprinting. Also, like I mentioned before, right, when we're doing a single leg jump, our ankles and our leg has to co-contract and quickly stiffen so then we can go up, right? And that's something that's very similar in the sprint as well, right? A lot of times if you improve your single leg jumping abilities, right, that can also then kind of improve your sprinting as well. And I think it's vice versa as well. If you're doing a lot of sprinting, you're getting really good at quickly stiffening up and co-contracting all those muscles around the joints so then you can propel yourself each time, and that's something that can help out with your single leg jump. Anytime I do a field workout, and this is something you guys should try if you haven't already, is if you're doing sprinting and you're doing any sort of single leg jump, the first time you do it, I want you to do your single leg jumps and all your single leg jump exercises first, and then do your sprints afterwards. See how you feel. And then the next time you do it, do your sprints first. Make sure you do all your sprints, your running, whatever it is, first, and then finish your workout with your single leg jumps. And I guarantee that after you do your sprints, your single leg jumps are going to feel a lot better. I know me personally, if I start with sprints and then I go into single leg jumps, my single leg jumps just feel so much better. And it's because we've primed that ability to kind of stiffen and co-contract with a lot of reps, right? If I do a 50-yard sprint, that's a lot of steps. That's a lot of individual reps that can then help out when I go into that single leg jump. So that's another really great reason. And then with sprints, we've also got some variety as well. It doesn't just have to be like, just straight line, regular 100-meter sprints or whatever it is. Talk about curved sprints a lot, where you're sprinting in a curved fashion. It's not just a straight sprint. So if you're at a soccer field or a football field, a lot of times they've got that big circle in the middle of the field. If you just follow that line all the way around, you can do like a semicircle. That's what most people do. I wouldn't go crazy and do the full circle, but just kind of sprinting along the semicircle is a really great way to do that. That way you're training, getting that kind of stiffness and that co-contraction, again, in those weird hip angles, in those weird ankle angles when you're kind of turned, right? And it's not just because it's not training your banana cuts. That's a common criticism that I get. It's just because it's training different angles, right? When we're changing direction, like I mentioned earlier, right? When we plant and then we stop ourselves and then we change directions back out, our ankles and our hips are bending into these weird kind of sideways angles, right? And when we're doing curved sprints, we're getting into these very similar sideways angles. So again, it's like when I'm doing a sprint, I'm getting a ton of reps of strengthening, getting faster in those sideways angles. So I think curve sprints are a great way to kind of train that. I can also just do kind of short accelerations, like I mentioned earlier, out of that kneeling position. We can play around with a lot of different starting positions depending on what I want to train. If I want to train a very deep hip bend, stuff like that. And then again, those long sprints are another great option as well. Moving on, number 2 now is the rear foot elevated split squat. Some people also call this a Bulgarian split squat. I personally call it a rear foot elevated split squat, but this I think is a great exercise. This is where you're doing an exercise that's very similar to a lunge, but you've got one foot down in front of you, and then your back foot is elevated up onto something. Some people use a bench or a box. If you have like a rear foot elevated stand where that back foot can go on like a roller, I think those are really, really great. We're getting really, really good single leg strength with this exercise. I find a lot of people oftentimes can't do like 8 to 10 reps with no weight of this rear foot elevated split squat without their legs absolutely burning. So I think that's very low hanging fruit where we can get a ton of just single leg strength that can then kind of carry over to a lot of things, right? I think if you're having difficulty just doing a couple body weight reps, right, no weight and your legs are already burning, that tells us that we can improve like your body's force producing capabilities out of each leg, right? And that's something that can really, really help out. Now, what's also great about the rear foot elevated split squat is we have a couple options on how we can kind of change it up, right? If I bring my foot farther out, so away from my body, that starts to train my hip a little bit more because now my knee isn't bending as much, and a lot more of me getting down into a deeper position is coming from my hip bending. So I'm really training my glutes a lot more, really getting a little bit more hamstring as well, like the part of the hamstring that connects up into the hip, right? So some great strengthening of that. Also, if I wanted to train my quad a little bit more, then I could just bring my foot closer to my body. Now my hip isn't having to bend as much because it's coming from my knee a lot more. So again, getting the quad a bit. So another reason I like this exercise is just because it's pretty adjustable in that sense. Now, what I think also great about the rear foot elevated split squat, it's not an exercise where I think you just need to do like 3 sets of 10 reps, or you just need to do 3 sets of 8 to 12, like what's pretty common, right? With the rear foot elevated split squat, I think people can go pretty heavy with this one, and they can do sets of like 3 to 5 reps, and that's where we're training a lot more strength. When we're training those sets of like 8 to 12 reps, a lot of times it's a little bit more focused on just like muscle building. Of course, we're getting some strength benefit with that as well. When you're lifting weight, you're going to be getting some sort of strength benefit, but 8 to 12 reps usually a little bit better for muscle building. Whereas if we're going like 3 to 5 reps with some heavier weights, that's when you're going to see some really good strength benefit as well. So I think you'll see a lot of people, right, hold some pretty heavy dumbbells at their sides and do like 3 to 5 reps. Another way I really like doing this one is with a Smith machine. A Smith machine, if you're not familiar with that, it's that machine that has a bar in it, but the bar can only travel straight up and down. It's in that fixed kind of path, right? So if you do a rear foot elevated split squat with that Smith machine and you've got the bar up on your back, right? Now all the balance component of it has completely gone out the window. Now you don't have to worry about stabilizing yourself, right? Even if you have pretty good balance, you never feel shaky. If you're holding dumbbells, to some extent, you're having to balance yourself a little bit, right? Because you've got nothing externally to hold on to help balance yourself, right? So naturally, a little bit of your strength capabilities are limited because you don't have any sort of stability kind of helping you out. With the Smith machine, it's completely fixed, right? You're holding onto it. All the balance has gone out the window. Now you can get full, true force production capability. So you can get true single leg strength and really, really start to overload it, right? So I've seen some people put on some pretty heavy weight with the Smith machine. And again, that's a way where we can get some big single leg strength in each leg. So yeah, that's some of the reasons that I really like the rear foot elevated split squat. And that's why it's number 2 on my top 5 list. And finally, let's move on to number 1. The number 1 exercise that I would say is best is the trap bar deadlift. Now, again, let's be clear here, right? This is number 1 on the list. That doesn't mean it's going to be number 1 for every single person. I think generally speaking, right, the trap bar deadlift is one of the best exercises, and I've got a lot of reasons to kind of support that. Number 1, I think it's just really good full body strength. Now, the trap bar deadlift is, it's a deadlift, so it's going to be primarily a lower body exercise. That's just the nature of it, right? You're getting a ton of posterior chain, which is your hamstrings and your glutes, right? Really training those up. But the rest of the posterior chain is everything on your back, right? Because when you're doing a deadlift where you're having to pick something up off the ground, right? All your back muscles, your lats, your core, everything is having to squeeze and engage. So you're training all those muscles. And then the hips and the knees and the lower body is really what's doing most of the lift, while everything else is also just kind of having to squeeze and brace. So they're getting some strength benefits as well. I should probably back up. If you're not familiar with what a trap bar deadlift is, a trap bar is that kind of hexagon shaped bar that you might have seen where you stand in the middle of it and then you have the handles off to the side and then you're lifting those. Whereas a traditional barbell deadlift is that straight bar and the bar is kind of out in front of you. The trap bar, you're standing right in the middle of it and the handles are off to your sides and the weight is off to your sides as well. But yeah, it's a great exercise really for the full body. It's more targeting though like the hamstrings and the glutes. So I think if we're getting some really good lower body strength with this exercise, then that's something that's going to help out most people, right? One of the reasons I like the trap bar deadlift over just the regular straight bar deadlift is it's a little bit more of like a squat hybrid. Whereas with the regular deadlift with the straight bar, your hips have to start a little bit higher. Your knees have to start a little bit less bent. So it's a very, very isolated movement on the hamstrings and the glutes. So just the backside of the legs. But the trap bar deadlift, your shins often have to kind of drop a little bit more. So your knees are a little bit more bent. So you're getting a little bit more quad, right? And it's a little bit more like a squat. It's like a squat deadlift hybrid. And a lot of times, the angles that your body gets into, so kind of your torso angle and your shin angle, a lot of times is very similar to the angles that you get into when you're accelerating out of a sprint. So if we can get strong in that position, if we can produce a lot of force in the position that we accelerate out of, I think that's going to be something that's very, very advantageous for a lot of people. Also, because the weight is off to your side, I've found that for a lot of people, it's a lot easier, I would say, to maintain like quote unquote good form. Right? With the deadlift, you don't want to look like a scared cat where your back is just insanely rounded. That can be a pretty big injury risk for a lot of people. And I think for ultimate players, right, we're deadlifting in order to get better at the sport. We're not power lifters where deadlifting is the sport, right? Deadlifting is a tool to get better at our sport. So if we can use an exercise like a trap bar deadlift, that's a lot safer and it kind of naturally helps keep good form, right? I think a lot of people can just kind of learn good form very, very quickly with the trap bar. I think just the weight being off to the side kind of naturally allows that a little bit more. I think that's huge, right? If we can kind of take away that whole learning curve of having to like learn the skill, quote unquote, learn the skill of the exercise, then I think that's really important. Like then we can just get straight to all the benefits of the exercise without having to go through this whole like technique phase of an exercise that again is just a skill, right? It's just a tool to get us better at ultimate. Why are we spending so much time trying to improve that? So yeah, I really like the trap bar. I think having the weight off to the sides just kind of engages your lat muscles a little bit more, which is probably what helps most people just naturally get into a little bit better back position with that. Also with a trap bar, a lot of times they'll have two options where one side will have handles that are a little bit higher up. So that you're not having to kind of go through as much of a range of motion. You're not having to bend down as far. And then you can flip it over and then it's got the same thing. They've got low handles on the other side. So now you're having to bend a little bit deeper. So I think it kind of gives us some options of if you want to use those low handles and you want to train through a little bit of a deeper hip and knee bend, I think that's great. But then also with those high handles, now I can start to overload it a little bit more because it's higher and I don't have to bend down as deep. I can lift a lot more weight. So think about like a vertical jump, right? When you're doing a vertical jump, you're not bending all the way down into your deepest squatting position. Oftentimes you're bending down into like a quarter or a half squat, right? So if I can get a lot stronger in these kind of quarter squat, half squat positions, like I could maybe with the high handles, or if I elevate the trap bar on something. So let's say underneath the plates, I put like little mats, or I put more plates so that the trap bar is a little bit higher up and I don't have to bend down as more, right? I can get very, very strong and I can put on a lot of weight and produce a lot of force out of these more like shallow positions that I might need. So that's just another way that we can kind of change around. I also think like quick, powerful reps are something that's really good. So not everything with a trap bar, right? And not everything with all these lifts, for example, has to be like us putting on as much weight as possible, right? Just because I can trap bar deadlift 400 pounds and then I increase it to 600 pounds, right? That doesn't mean that my ultimate Frisbee performance is also going to increase, right? If I add 50% to my trap bar deadlift, that doesn't mean my ultimate Frisbee game is going to improve 50%, right? A lot of times we can like change around how we're lifting to work on different things, right? It's not just always pure like 1 rep max, pure strength, right? One of those ways is if I do like quicker reps, so maybe I'm only using 50, somewhere between like 30 and 70%, let's say, of what I feel like I'm truly capable of, but I'm lifting that weight as fast as possible. Like I'm treating it like it's 1,000 pounds and I'm trying to, lift it up as quick as possible, get it off the ground as quick as possible, right? That's very, very powerful. I'm training my muscles to contract and produce a lot of force, but as quick as possible. That's explosiveness, right? Is how fast can I get out of a position, right? So a lot of times we don't always have to just jump to super, super heavy weights. We can also kind of play around with that. So I think that's a good variation that you could do, not just for the trap bar deadlift for any exercise, but that's something you could do for the trap bar deadlift. Also trap bar jumps are another way to kind of take that even further, where I could put a very light weight, maybe like 10, 20% of my trap bar deadlift, 1 rep max, or what I feel like I can fully lift, right? And I literally jump with the weight. Maybe it's starting on the ground and I just go up into a full max effort jump, right? That's a ton of power, a ton of explosiveness there. I could also lift the trap bar up and then do like a jump where I would sink down a little bit and then try to get up as quick as possible. And that quick kind of deceleration of the weight in my body and then redirecting and exploding back up, right? That's another just training stimulus, essentially, right? And just another way that we can kind of train the muscles. So I think another reason I like the trap bar deadlift is there's just a lot of variety and variations that you can do with it as well. So yeah, that is everything. Those are my top 5 exercises for Ultimate Frisbee with a couple honorable mentions. Again, remember that this is just general. It might not work for you, might work better for one person than it does for the other. So just take this information with a grain of salt. But yeah, hopefully this stuff was helpful. Let me know if you guys have any questions about this. And yeah, have a good rest of your day.
You've been listening to the TOBU Fitness Podcast. We hope you've enjoyed the show. If you did, make sure to like, rate, and review. We'll be back soon. But in the meantime, hit us up on Instagram and YouTube at TOBU Fitness. And to get info on one-on-one coaching and training programs, hit the website at tobufitness.com. Thanks so much for listening, and see you next time on the TOBU Fitness Podcast.